大家你好，我叫 Jingmai. I believe that everybody's life is a journey, and the destination is not the most important part. It's how we get there that makes us special and creates important human diversity. I'm a paleontologist, 古生物学家, which means that I study extinct animals through their petrified, fossilized remains. Now, most paleontologists grew up loving dinosaurs as little kids and knew they always wanted to do paleontology. But I found my passion a little later in life, and today I would like to tell you a little about my journey that brought me here to China. So, even if it's a little cliche, my biggest role model is my mother, and she is also a professor of geology, 地质学家. My mother grew up in Hong Kong, the daughter of Shandong refugees, and she went back to school and did her PhD when she was 40. And having done a PhD myself, I know this is no small feat, especially when you have 4 kids. And she also did hers in record-breaking time. Geology had been her passion growing up, and her choice to do a career doing what she loved and following her dreams has always been a major factor in my own life choices. So growing up in LA, we used Kuaizi and celebrated Zhongzhoujie and Chunjie every year, and I grew up fascinated with my Chinese cultural heritage. So in 2001, my entire family went to China, and this trip changed my life. I absolutely fell in love with China, even though when I would try to go shopping, they would tell me I was too fat for clothes, or even once, they tried to sell me men's clothes. Despite these embarrassing experiences, I had a great time, and I decided one day I wanted to live in China. And my big brother loved it so much that when the rest of us went home, he stayed in China and lived in Beijing for over 12 years. So before I could make my dream of living in China come true, I first had to attend university, where I met an amazing mentor. He really cared about being a good teacher and about, helping you find your passion. And he's a paleontologist named Dr. Donald Prothero. And honestly, if I hadn't become infected with his passion, I probably would not be a paleontologist today. What they say is true. Choose a career doing something you love, and you will never work a day. So I study the remains of fossil birds, 古鸟类, and half of all Mesozoic fossil birds come from China, making China the best place in the world to study their early evolution. So this is a reconstruction of the early Cretaceous Jiufotung avifauna, which is the most diverse Cretaceous avifauna known to science, and is the youngest stage in the famous Jehol biota, 热河生物群. So do we have any paleontology enthusiasts in the room? Can anybody identify any of the birds in this reconstruction? Well, it's everybody's different imagination, so I can't blame you, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about these birds. My favorite fossil bird from the Jehol is Jeholornis. And Jeholornis is the most primitive bird living in the Jehol. And you can tell this because it has 3 claws on its hand, same as non-avian dinosaurs, and it has this elongate reptilian tail. Another interesting thing about Jeholornis is that it has very small seeds, and we know from specimens preserving seeds in the stomach that it was an herbivore. By studying a large number of these specimens, we were able to reconstruct the tail, and this showed us something really interesting. This bird basically had 2 tails, one that is proximal and one that is distal, and these 2 tails work together so that despite the fact this bird was very primitive, it was actually a very capable flyer. The most common bird in the 热河 is 孔子鸟, Confuciusornis. And this bird is the most primitive and oldest bird that has a beak and no teeth, and also that has an abbreviated tail that ends in distally fused vertebrae. And both of these are features that are present in all living birds. Now, another really interesting thing about these specimens is that you can see that some of them preserve these elongate, beautiful tail feathers, and some clearly do not. And we interpret this as evidence of sexual dimorphism, the same as we see in many living birds, in which the males have beautiful ornamental feathers that they use to attract the females. The largest early Cretaceous bird is Sapiornis, or huiniao, which you can see flying in the background here. And this bird had very large wings, a very large wingspan, but it only had 2 claws on its hand. So the hand is getting shorter, more similar to living birds. Despite this fact that this bird had such large wings, it is the only Cretaceous bird that does not have a sternum, 胸骨. And in living birds, the sternum forms the anchor for the very large and powerful muscles that birds use to fly. So the fact that Sapiornis did not have this bone makes it so that we don't understand how it could fly, even though we hypothesize that it definitely could. So in order for you to fully appreciate just how amazing these Jehol fossils are, I need to show you what the typical bird fossil looks like from outside of China. Half of all Mesozoic bird species from outside of China are known from a single bone or less. So you can see these 4 different fragments here are 4 different fragments of the coracoid bone, and each one represents a different species, even though they barely overlap. So bird fossils are among the rarest type of fossil in the world, and this is because birds are small, limited in their terminal body size by their aerial locomotion, but also because bird bones are very delicate and hollow. And this is, of course, to reduce weight during flight, but more than that, birds actually have extensions of their lungs that fill the hollow spaces in their bones, allowing them to increase their oxygen intake in order to meet the demands of powered flight. So why are there so many amazing fossil birds here in China? Well, to understand this, I first have to tell you a little bit about how fossils form. So of course it relies on an animal dying, and then it being fairly rapidly buried before it gets scavenged or otherwise destroyed. So the Jehol biota represents an ancient volcanic lake system. And lakes are fed by rivers, and rivers are water that is high energy, so it's carrying sediment. But as soon as it hits the lake, which is still, it loses its energy and it deposits its sediment load, so that at the bottom of lakes, there is constantly sedimentation occurring. So imagine that a Confuciusornis is flying by over the lake, and it flies into a cloud of volcanic gases, and it falls poisoned into the lake, and it will float on the surface for a little while, but eventually it sinks to the bottom, where slowly but surely it is covered in sediment fed into the lakes by the rivers. Another important thing about lakes is that the bottom of the lake is anoxic, meaning there's no oxygen, so little scavengers like crabs can't live there and feed off the carcass, so that very often we find these lake specimens preserved absolutely pristine. So when the ancient Jehol lake system lasted for over 10 million years, from 131 to 120 million years ago, and it covered a vast region. So there's a lot of rock for us to look through. But we are limited, of course, on what is exposed on the surface of the Earth. So when paleontologists, we go looking for fossils, we go into the field, why? We look for exposed rock, which we call an outcrop, like you see in this picture, and we start breaking chunks of rock free. And you turn it on its side, and you hit it with a hammer, and the rock will naturally split open along a plane of weakness, such as one represented by organic material. So I mentioned that bird fossils are very rare, so most of the time what we find when we split the rock open is plant material, sometimes insects, or sometimes small fish like the common Lycoptera. So you can go into the field and work for weeks, 10 hours a day, for weeks, even a month, in the hot sun, splitting slabs all day, and not find a single bird fossil. The last time I went in the field, it was a short trip, but we were out there 5 days, and I didn't find anything. So I was a little discouraged. But I remember on the first day we were out there, early in the morning, my boss,周忠和, is sitting next to me, just splitting slabs, and he goes, "Oh, look at this amazing fossil I found with feathers and everything." And you know, some paleontologists are just born with this natural, inherent ability to find fossils. Unfortunately, I'm not one of them. So when we find a fossil in the field, this is what it looks like, covered in dirt. And it is only after hours and hours of hard work by very skilled technicians that the dirt is slowly removed so that we can see the bones underneath, and then you have the amazing specimens that I've been showing you in previous slides. So even if we relied on paleontologists, the lucky paleontologists, to collect us fossils, there still would not be that many, because we really only spend 1 or 2 months a year in the field. The rest of the time we're holed up in our office. But in China, we have the power of numbers, and there are thousands of farmers that are helping us to collect amazing fossils. And this has resulted in the largest collections of dinosaur and bird fossils in the world. So for example, T-Rex. Did you know that there are only about 40-something specimens of T-Rex, and only one of them is over 90% complete? And T-Rex is like the world's favorite dinosaur, and we've been looking for it for over 100 years. Now, in contrast, Anchiornis heishijinyaolong was named in 2009, and just last year, I published a paper in which we did a study based on 224 specimens in a single collection. Now, when you have this much data, you can learn so much more about an extinct species. Like, you can learn how it changed with ontogeny, or if the males or females were different from each other, or if there was interspecific variation. Now, the other really amazing thing about Jiahou fossils is that they very commonly preserve biological traces that are otherwise extremely rare in the fossil record. This is soft tissue traces like feathers, but also traces of the digestive system and other parts of the body. So for example, this specimen of Yanniao, Yannornis, here you can see 2 whole fish preserved in the crop, which is part of the esophagus, and there's partially digested fish bones preserved in the ventriculus. And of course, you can see some feather impressions. Unfortunately, I cannot explain to you exactly how these amazing soft tissues preserve. What I can tell you is that it's extremely complex. Every fossil is like a snowflake, and they're different and formed under slightly different conditions. And even within one specimen, different parts of the body represent different and unique chemical microenvironments with different conditions resulting in different type of preservation. So it's very difficult to try to understand. The most interesting soft tissue that I've ever personally worked on is the preservation of soft tissue of the reproductive system. And we actually stumbled upon this when we were looking for specimens preserving stomach contents, because I'm very interested in understanding early bird diet. Instead, we found the soft tissue remains of the mature ovarian follicles. And this is the first time that soft tissue of the reproductive system has ever been preserved. Though, of course, paleontologists, we study the reproduction of dinosaur behavior through preserved eggs and nests. Birds are unique in that they are the only living amniotes with a single functional ovary and oviduct. All other amniotes, including humans, including crocodilians, including closely related non-avian dinosaurs, have 2 functional ovaries and oviducts. And we know that dinosaurs have 2 because there's an exceptional specimen of a late Cretaceous Oviraptorosaur. It's a partial pelvis, and it preserves 2 eggs in situ, which we interpret are preserved in the oviducts about to be laid, indicating that there are still 2 functional ovaries. So this is one of the amazing specimens that we published in Nature, and you can see that the cluster of ovarian follicles is preserved only on one side of the body, indicating that these very early birds were like living birds in that they only had 1 ovary. Now, the preservation of reproductive tissue is really interesting because it allows us to confidently identify the gender of the fossil specimen. So this specimen preserves ovaries, so therefore it must be a female. And you can see that it does not preserve any elongate tail feathers. So this supports hypotheses that these elongate, beautiful tail feathers are only present in males. Now, even though these early birds were modern with regards to only having 1 ovary, they were still different from living birds. And this is related to the fact that early birds were like dinosaurs in that they grew very slowly and took several years to reach adult size. whereas all living birds have a unique metabolism and they grow to adult size very quickly within less than a year. And we know that dinosaurs and early birds took many years to reach adult size because we cut their bones open, and dinosaur bones are actually like trees, and they deposit annual growth lines, so we can more or less count up the rings and identify how old the specimen was. So this bird preserving ovarian follicles was 4 years old. So what is interesting about these specimens is they are preserving an intermediate condition between what we knew existed in dinosaurs and what we observe in living birds. So I study fossil birds from as many different perspectives as I can. I continue to study new specimens preserving traces of the ovarian tissues in order to understand the evolution of reproductive behavior in dinosaurs and birds. I do histology in order to understand how these birds grow, and I study stomach contents in order to understand different dietary differences. And of course, anytime a specimen preserves beautiful feathers, I also study those. Did you know that now we are even able to tell what color these extinct birds were? And we do this by taking a very small sample of the feather and we view it under a scanning electron microscope. And this is what you see. And these little symmetrical objects that you see all over are melanosomes, and these are the pigment-containing monoorganelles responsible for color in bird feathers. And in living birds, different colors correlate with different shaped melanosomes. So we can look at a fossil and match the shape to what we see in a living bird and identify what color the feather was. So for example, this is a black feather. So as a result of this really cool new research, I had to contact my artist friend, Michael Rothman, and tell him that this beautiful reconstruction that he did might be a little inaccurate. So far, the only colors we have direct evidence for are black, brown, reddish brown, gray. However, these are all melanosome-based colors, and bright colors like yellow and green are structural colors that are formed in the feather in a way that is not likely to preserve so that we can visually observe it. However, there are brilliant paleontologists all over the world continuing to develop new techniques, and I believe that one day soon we may even be able to detect such structural colors. What I love about my life is not unique to paleontology. I'm not saying everybody go out and be a paleontologist. What I love about my life is being a scientist. And even if it sounds cheesy, I think there is something so cool about taking a question, an unknown, and being the first to answer it, to contributing to the cumulative knowledge of mankind. And you know, the more you learn, the more you find out there is to learn. And I'm constantly asking questions of other scientists and finding out that we don't know. There are interesting questions to answer in every field of study. And this constant horizon of new things to learn means that you never get bored and you always feel young. And as a scientist, you have the opportunity to travel the world for collaborations, for conferences, to collect data. I've collected dinosaurs in Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, Outer Mongolia, South Africa. I've given talks, I've been invited to give talks in Chile, the UK, Japan, and everywhere you meet interesting people, and I make collaborations with Russians and Argentines, and of course people right here in our own backyard. Like, I just put together an amazing grant to study the biomechanics of early flight with this great professor at Tsinghua University. So the world of science is an ever-expanding universe with a million different pathways for you to find your passion. And in order to dispel any lingering preconceptions you may have that scientists are boring nerds, I would like to draw your attention to this photo. Everyone you see in this photo rocking out is a paleontologist. And this was taken at the very end of last year's annual meeting of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, which is the most important meeting for our field. But at the end of a rigorous 5-day meeting, everybody just, you know, from the oldest, most senior professor to the young students, just dances the night away till 2 in the morning, and I'm the DJ. So As you can tell, I'm really passionate about what I do, and I really hope that you also find your passion. 谢谢大家。